Hi, Namaste. My name is Henry Shadikar. While filming a documentary on the life and teaching of Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi, it became obvious that one part was missing to complete my documentary. I needed someone to explain clearly what was the process of self-inquiry, which, according to Ramana Maharshi, was the best way to enlightenment or self-realization. I asked around the Ramana Maharshi ashram, and only one name came up again and again. That was David Godman. When I met Mr. Godman, he told me that he was not really interested in doing video presentation since his guru told him that he should focus on writing books. But he was kind enough to give me an hour, and this little interview, when posted on YouTube, was viewed by more than 25,000 people. So I contacted him again and asked him for a longer interview. And that longer interview turned out to be more than 20 hours of video presentation on the life and teaching of Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi. The video that follows this presentation is on self-inquiry that has now been viewed more than 200,000 times. I agree with everything that David Godman says in this video, but I must add that in the last part of the presentation, I do not agree that one should not focus on the heart or any other parts of the body. It is clear for me that you can practice self-inquiry if you're a Christian, if you are Hindu, if you are a Buddhist, if you are a Muslim. In various yoga traditions like Kriya Yoga, Siddha Yoga, Surat Shahab Yoga, practitioners bring their attention to the Ajna chakra. You can bring your attention to the Ajna chakra and still practice self-inquiry. In various Buddhist tradition and also in Raja Yoga, practitioners bring their attention to the heart center to develop the Buddha Chitta, the attitude of loving kindness at all time. You can be a loving, kind practitioner and still practice self-inquiry. So I invite you to listen carefully to this presentation, and from my point of view, whatever spiritual practice that you are now involved in, you can add the process of self-inquiry. It can only benefit your practice to enlightenment.
Namo Ramanaya Nalam Peravazhu Vimochanameyan Viraimalattal Vazhu. Namo Ramanaya Nalam Peravazhu Vimochanameyan Viraimalattal Vazhu. I'm sitting in Palakottu in Annamalai Swami's ashram. A few minutes ago
Henri and I were discussing off camera Bhagavan's work, Who Am I? He produced a copy and he's asked me to say a few words about it. This is the booklet, I would say, because it's only a few pages long, that contains everything that you need to know to start the practice of self-inquiry. This work originated when Bhagavan still lived on the hill around 1902. At that time he wasn't speaking to people who came. If people came with a question, if he wanted to answer, he would write with his finger in the dirt outside the mantapam where he was staying. So this devotee called Siva Prakasam Pillai arrived and hit on the topic that Bhagavan most wanted to talk about, which was, who am I? Siva Prakasam Pillai asked this question, and Bhagavan was inspired to have a dialogue with him. Because he wasn't speaking, he wrote with his finger in the dirt. Siva Prakasam Pillai remembered most of the answers because they weren't that complicated. I think he wrote the last one down, and the rest he wrote down at home from memory. This particular dialogue then languished in his notes for about 20 years, and in the early 1920s he wrote a verse biography of Bhagavan, and at the end of it he just thought, well, that was a nice conversation I had in 1902, I'll now just tack that on as an appendix. So the appendix appeared, the book came to Ramanashram. Devotees liked it because it was a very simple, straightforward primer on what Bhagavan's teachings were, both theoretical and practical. Devotees liked it so much it became published as a separate pamphlet, still in its question and answer form. And then in 1926, Bhagavan himself took a hand. He took this dialogue and he rewrote the whole thing in the form of an essay. So this is really the only prose work he ever wrote. Self-Inquiry, which has his name, was actually written by somebody else. So he sat down and wrote all the points that Siva Prakasam Pillai had noted down. He reformulated them in a single continuous prose work, and it was still entitled Who Am I? It doesn't exclusively cover spiritual practice. It's about the nature of world, the nature of happiness, what the mind is, and so on. But it does contain a very key section on how to do self-inquiry. When people came to see Bhagavan after the publication of this essay and asked about his teachings, quite frequently he would send them to the bookstore and say, read this little booklet, you'll find everything is in there, and if you still have some questions afterwards, if you want more elaborations, come back and we'll discuss it. So this was the primer, if you like, the help manual for Bhagavan's teachings that all beginners were asked to go through before they came back to Bhagavan and asked for further instructions. Now Bhagavan was so, I'd say enamored. He liked this little presentation so much, he asked his brother, the ashram manager, to subsidize it, to make sure that no one would be priced out of having a copy. It went on sale at incredibly cheap prices, below the cost of printing in many cases. He also encouraged devotees who were bilingual to bring out editions in other languages. So for perhaps the last 25 years of Bhagavan's life, this particular text was on sale in Ramanashram as the basic primer of Bhagavan's teachings and the first step on how to do self-inquiry for everyone who came in whatever language they spoke. My advice is Bhagavan's advice. Before you watch the film, go to this little booklet, acquaint yourself with Bhagavan's teachings, and then listen to what I have to say about them. This is the source, this is Bhagavan telling you how to get enlightened, and it's all you really need in life. Now I'll throw one more story in before I read one extract. I have a friend who lives in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and she said, I have no idea where this book came from, but one day it plopped through my letterbox. There was a photo of Bhagavan and there was a Hebrew copy of Who Am I? She said, I went through it and I was a devotee of Bhagavan for 17 years after that, without feeling any need to come to India to find another book, to find another photo. I looked at these 10 pages and I thought, that's all I need to know in life. I have my picture, I have my presentation of the teaching, and I have my practical advice on how to realize the self. I'm happy, I'm content, that's all I need. Henri was asking, what is Bhagavan's simple, most basic message on how to do self-inquiry? And here it is. Question 9. What is the path of inquiry for understanding the nature of the mind? To which Bhagavan replies, that which rises as I in this body is the mind. If one inquires as to where in the body the thought I rises first, one would discover that it rises in the heart. That is the place of the mind's origin. Even if one thinks constantly I, one will be led to that place. Of all the thoughts that arise in the mind, the I thought is the first. It is only after the rise of this that the other thoughts arise. It is after the appearance of the first personal pronoun I that the second and third personal pronouns appear. Without the first personal pronoun, there will not be the second and third. And the next question is, how will the mind become quiescent? To which the answer is, from Bhagavan, by the inquiry, who am I? The thought, who am I, will destroy all other thoughts, and like the stick used for stirring the burning pyre, it will itself in the end get destroyed. Then there will arise self-realization. Then this is the crucial question about practice. The question is, what is the means for constantly holding on to the thought, who am I? To which Bhagavan replies, when other thoughts arise, one should not pursue them, but should inquire, to whom do they arise? It does not matter how many thoughts arise. As each thought arises, one should inquire with diligence, to whom has this thought arisen? The answer that would emerge would be, to me. Thereupon, if one inquires, who am I? The mind will go back to its source, and the thought that arose will become quiescent. With repeated practice in this manner, the mind will develop the skill to stay in its source. So those are Bhagavan's instructions on what you have to do. Now that's not the end of the story. This is a two-way transaction. What Bhagavan is saying is, if you can make your eye go back to its source and abide there, then you invoke the power of the Guru, the power of the self, and ultimately it's this power which is going to suck your quiescent I thought into its source and destroy it. What Bhagavan is saying you have to do is, through repeated practice, take your sense of I back to its source and hold it there in such a way that nothing distracts it, nothing makes it want to go out and follow a thought. If you reach this state of effortless, thought-free I sense, then this I will be abiding at its source, but this is not liberation. This is simply the I offering itself up in a way as a sacrifice to the self. When this I no longer has any impetus to move out, when there's no momentum to chase a thought, then the power of the self will reveal itself to that I thought, it will suck it into itself, it will destroy it, and liberation will result. Your job is to take the I back to its source and hold it there. The power of the self acting through the Guru, its job is to take hold of that I and destroy it once you've done that initial process.
Namo Ramanaya Nalam
You started off by talking about the Buddha, saying that one should not take anything on trust, not take anything as a belief, but one should find out for oneself what is true and what is not true, and one should reject what is not true and hold on to truth. Now that is the essence of what Bhagavan had to say, and it's also it's the core of what he taught about self-inquiry. Now, first of all, I want to say that if people don't know a lot about Ramana Maharshi, what they do know is that he taught self-inquiry. So they tend to conflate the two and say Ramana Maharshi taught self-inquiry and not really go into the nuances of all the other things that were going on, all the other things that he suggested, recommended. So I would like to first start by saying that Bhagavan himself did not set great store by verbal instructions. So he said that my highest teachings are the silent emanations that come off me. If you sit quietly in front of me, if you quieten your own mind and just sit in my presence or the presence of anyone else who is in this state, there's a kind of infectious quality to the state of enlightenment, and you make yourself receptive and open to it by being quiet yourself. It's a bit like having a radio receiver that's tuned to the right frequency. The right frequency to receive the emanation of a jnani is inner quiet, inner silence. If you can turn your own dial to that particular setting, then you find out what the state of that jnani is without any intermediary instructions or practice. Somehow, by a kind of osmosis, you absorb the emanations of his state, and that state becomes your own. So for him, that was the highest teachings he had. Then we come down one level. Some people, they can't do it, or they want a dialogue, or they want instructions. They feel a compulsion to do something. They can't be quiet, they can't put themselves in the state where the emanations are going to show them the experience. So then Bhagavan would quite often, instead of giving them a practice, he would say, you are already enlightened. Now, people would say, yes, I know that, but what do I do? It slides off most people. But if you go through all the recordings of what Bhagavan had to say that have been recorded, you won't find that instructions on inquiry or anything else are the single largest topic. The thing he said most often, in various shapes and forms, was, you are the self, you are consciousness, you are Brahman, you are already free, etc., etc. So although sitting in the presence of a jnani and being quiet was what Bhagavan considered to be being open to his highest teachings, he himself knew that most people couldn't be on that wavelength. Most people didn't have the maturity, the receptivity to take advantage of that. He would try for a time, he might say, but you're already enlightened, you're already the self, you're already Brahman. But I think he knew that most people were not going to take delivery of that statement in a place where it became their experience. When a guru tells you the truth about yourself, it's a piece of information. It doesn't resonate with you, it doesn't stimulate that experience in yourself, except in very rare cases. So then, the next level down is practicalities. I'm not getting the experience by sitting here quietly. I'm not getting the experience because you've told me I am the self. I want to do something to realize the self. What should I do? So now we're at the level of concrete, practical advice. So the first thing to appreciate about Bhagavan is that he was absolutely non-prescriptive. Ramanashram was never a kind of spiritual boot camp where you came in, you had 5 o'clock meditation sessions, someone told you how to sit, where to sit, what to practice. If you came to Ramanashram, you sat with him in his presence. If you wanted to speak, you could speak. If you wanted to just sit and be quiet, you sat and be quiet. If you had a doubt or a problem, you could go up to him and you could say, Bhagavan, give me some advice, or Bhagavan, help me, or what practice should I do? And even with promptings like this, Bhagavan would not directly say, do self-inquiry. He might say, well, what are you doing now? And you might say, oh, I'm repeating Krishna's name, or I'm worshipping this particular image. And although he is on the record as saying that self-inquiry is the most direct way to get enlightened, even then he wouldn't tell you to do it. He would say, very good, carry on. If you had a practice that you were happy with, if you were content continuing with it, then he would say, very good, carry on. But if you came to him and said, for example, what's the quickest way to get enlightened? Almost invariably he would say self-inquiry. And if you came to him and said, I'm not happy with my japa or my pujas or whatever, do you think I should do something else? Then he might push you gently in the direction of self-inquiry. He did say on innumerable occasions that there are only 2 effective methods to get enlightened. One is to do self-inquiry, and the other is complete unconditional surrender to Guru or God.
Namo Ramana Maharshi
So if people chose the path of self-inquiry, which a lot of them did, and they came to him for advice, then we get to this point: what is self-inquiry? How is it done? How does it work? Why doesn't it work sometimes? And what makes a successful practice? Now, to answer all these particular facets, I want to explain first how Bhagavan saw the mind and how he thought it should be eliminated, because that's what self-inquiry really is. He said that all of your thoughts, all of your perceptions, all of your memories, all of your ideas, they're all an outgrowth or a predicate on one primal thought, which he called the I thought. This I is the equivalent of a string in a necklace. It's the thread that runs through every single idea, thought, perception that you have. And he said this I is the subject. It's yourself. Everything that the I thinks or perceives is an object. So I see a tree. I is the subject, the tree is an object. I feel angry, I is the subject, the emotion, anger is the object. He said that your attention is continually on the objects that you, the subject, I, are seeing, feeling and perceiving. And he said because your attention is always on objects rather than subjects, you never become aware of the true nature of what this subject is. And very interestingly, he said this subject I that you never look at is in fact a fiction. It's a false association. It arises from an idea that I am a person, I have a mind, I live inside a particular body, I do things, I remember things. He said that idea is absolutely wrong, and he said it's what causes you suffering, it's what makes you have wrong ideas about yourself, about the world. And he said every single wrong idea you have about yourself, about the world, about God, stems from this idea that you are a person inhabiting a body and having a mind. And he said this sense of personal identity, which he called the I thought, needs to be challenged, and it needs to be challenged repeatedly, regularly, on a moment-to-moment basis. So he said, because your attention is always on things that are not the I, the objects of your attention, the objects that you remember, believe, perceive, you never look at yourself to see what it is that is thinking your thoughts and perceiving your perceptions. He said that's where your focus needs to be. You're not looking at things that you want to study, things that you want to know. You're actually looking at the entity within you which thinks your thoughts and which perceives your perceptions. He said, what is this thing inside you that is aware of your thoughts? What is this thing inside you that claims it's perceiving objects outside of yourself? He said it's not something that ever comes under scrutiny, because we're all obsessed with a continuous flow of objects, remembered objects, perceived objects, the thought objects. He said what we need to do to find out the nature of this sense of individual identity is to be continuously aware of this one inner entity, this one inner thing that associates and identifies with all the things that it thinks and perceives. He called it the I thought, but I prefer, I is a bit of a loaded word, because if you tell people to start looking for their I or start focusing on their I, then they create another object. They think, oh, my I is up here or it's down here, and then they start focusing on an idea called the I. What I would suggest to people they do is look at themselves and be continuously aware. What is it inside yourself that thinks your thoughts when you have a thought? What is it inside yourself that perceives a perception when you see something? That is your I. That is your sense of individual identity. Now, this isn't simply a question of looking at something and understanding what it is, because what Bhagavan says is this thing that correlates, organizes all your thoughts, all your perceptions, isn't actually a real entity. continues to apparently be there because it's never looked at properly. He said if you can hold on to this sense of I, this thing that thinks your thoughts, and not be distracted by any passing thought objects, this I will very, very slowly start to subside. And he said if you can keep attention on this inner feeling, this thing that thinks my thoughts, without allowing it to escape and think any more thoughts, he says it will go back to its source and ultimately it will disappear, and that disappearance will reveal to you who you really are. So what he's saying in effect is that there is a false entity, something that has taken control of your life, which you call I, myself, my mind, which organizes and correlates all the perceptions, the feelings, the emotions, the thoughts, the beliefs. If you can cut that I off from all those things, hold on incessantly onto this inner awareness, the I that has these perceptions, that I starts to sink and finally it will disappear. The analogy I like the best is, Bhagavan said in one of his dialogues, he said, imagine it's the shirt of a man and his dog picks up the scent of that shirt. The dog can put its nose on the ground and follow that scent back to the original owner of that shirt. So this really is what the I thought is all about. The I thought is, it's not the real self, it's not who you really are, but by absolutely focusing intently on that thing within you, which has all these thoughts, you've picked up its scent and you're following it back to its source. And if you keep your metaphorical nose to this I thought and follow it back to its source, it goes back to the self, it goes back to the heart, and it disappears. This is the other analogy which Bhagavan used to use a lot. He said in a big wedding feast, there are two parties. There are the bride's party and the bridegroom's party, and it's quite possible for somebody to be there, pretend to be an important person, and one person will think he's with the bride's party, the other person will think he's with the bridegroom's party, and he can get away with causing trouble so long as nobody takes the trouble to pin him down and say, who exactly are you? Which party do you belong to? So he's saying that the I, it's not the self and it's not the mind, it's something in between which just causes you endless trouble because you never take the trouble to check up on it, see what it is and see where it comes from. He said if you isolate it, watch it, hold on to it and not let it be distracted by anything whatsoever, it can't exist any longer. This is a key to understanding why self-inquiry works and why Bhagavan recommended it. He said that the I can only exist in association with and identified with objects. It cannot exist by itself. There's no such thing as an I thought which isn't holding on to an idea or a perception or a thought or a belief. So he says if you sever all of those unwanted accretions from this sense of I that you have, that sense of I cannot subsist independently, it has to go back to its source and disappear. The holding on to that subjective sense of I, the rejecting of all possible distractions from it, the immersion in that subjective feeling of I as it goes back to its source and disappears, that's inquiry.
Namo Ramanaya Nalam Peravarga Vimochanameyan Viraiva.
So what I have just explained is a little bit abstract, possibly for most people, and I think again people will want to know, yes, but when I sit down and close my eyes and cross my legs, what do I do? This came up. People would come to Bhagavan and they would ask a question and he would say, who's asking that question? So it wasn't an evasive reply. He said the answer to most spiritual, most philosophical questions is a knowledge and an understanding of the I which is asking the question. So instead of giving an answer which would satisfy an I which he didn't believe was real or true or had any importance, he would tell people who is asking that question, find out the I who has asked me that particular question, I'm not going to give you an answer. If you want to find the answer, you have to get the experience of having that I disappear and see what remains. That's the answer to your question. So this was kind of a bit frustrating for a lot of people. They would come with all kinds of fancy philosophical theories, ideas. They'd try and argue with him. And he'd just keep coming back again and again. Who or what is this I which is asking me this question? You're talking about the content of the mind. I'm talking about the origin of the mind. I'm talking about that which causes the mind to have thoughts, to think thoughts. Go back to the thinker of the thoughts, find out where it arises from, and you'll get an answer to the question. He would say that when a thought arises in your mind, ask yourself, to whom does this thought occur? This is a way of transferring attention from the object that you're thinking about to the person, the subject who's having the thought. So you have the thought, you have the perception, you say, who has this thought, who has this perception? I do. So then you're already a little bit aware of the I which is having the thought. And then Bhagavan said, ask yourself, who am I? Who is this I who just had this thought, just had this perception? And he said, that's really all there is to it. He said, whenever your mind is distracted by objects that you're thinking about, take your attention back to the subject who had the thought and either try to see where it comes from or aggressively question it. Inquire into its nature, inquire into its origin by focusing intently on this sense of I and asking, who am I, and see where that leads you. It's not rocket science. It's a simple one-step process. He said every time your mind is on something else other than the I, take it back to this I, be aware of that I, intently, vigilantly, be aware of that subjective feeling of I inside yourself. If you get distracted, just gently reject the distraction, go back to the sense of I, hold on to it, grip it tightly, and if you hold on strongly enough and don't get distracted, it subsides and disappears. He said that's all there is to it, but you have to be vigilant, you have to be attentive, and for most people it's hard work and it goes on for a long time.
Namo Ramanaya Nalam Peravartha Vimochanameyan Viraima.
There are two ways you can look at this. Bhagavan said you can either ask yourself, who am I? Or you can simply be aware of this I thought, hold on to it intently and watch it disappear. Sometimes he would tell people, just ask yourself, who am I? Find out what is this I and where it comes from. And at other times he would just say, hold on to the I thought. If you check through all the literature, I would guess, well, I know actually because I have checked, I would say that ask him giving advice saying, ask yourself, who am I? Those replies slightly exceed the number of times he said, hold on to the I thought. But I think the reason that this happens is that most of the people who are asking him are people who've never done inquiry before. They're coming to him asking for advice on a new technique. So I think he would start them off by getting them to transfer attention by saying, who am I, who am I? But I think most people who do this practice, once they've started it, taken it up as a regular routine, they find this whole business of saying, to whom does this thought occur, to me, who am I, as a kind of little bit of circumlocution, a bit of a distraction, and they just spontaneously, very quickly, they move attention off the object which is distracting them and back to the subject which is the receiver or thinker of the distraction. There is one aspect of this which personally I think is important, although I would say that attention to the I ultimately is the goal that everyone should aim for, and that if you're really quiet, really peaceful, disturbing yourself to ask who am I lots and lots of times may not be the best advice. I would say that the fact that Bhagavan has told you to ask yourself, who am I, quite clearly, not only in the seminal text, who am I, but in many of his answers, means that you should, or if you follow his advice with faith, with conviction, then you've got the wind behind you. You've got Bhagavan's power, Bhagavan's grace, helping you to find the source of this I. He's told you to do this. If you follow his advice to the letter, with absolute faith and conviction that he knows what he's talking about, that he knows what's best for you, and if I follow this particular piece of advice to the letter, I will get results, then that's going to work for you as well. It's a matter of having this conviction. My guru has told me this via a book or in person. I will follow these instructions to the letter, and by doing so I invoke his grace because I'm following exactly what he asked me to do. That's one attitude. Also, I would say equally valid is him saying, intently hold on to this I thought. Be aware of it at all times. Don't allow your mind to stray anywhere else. Keep it completely absorbed in the sense of I. If you do that, then this I has to vanish. It can't stand constant scrutiny.
Namo Ramanaya nalam peravarga.
So I would like to qualify or expand on what I just said a little bit. Although Bhagavan said that you should, in every possible moment, be aware of what the mind is being distracted by and take it back to its source thought I, at no time did he suggest that doing self-inquiry was a traditional sitting meditation practice that you did at fixed hours. At no time did he ever give permission for any of his devotees to give up any worldly obligation that they had. He said this is something that you fit in at all times of the day, whenever your mind is not required for your work or your family. He didn't think it necessary to go to a cave, go to a monastery. He said if you go to a remote place, you can't leave your mind behind, you have to take your mind with you. He said what needs to be given up is not your circumstances, but your mind and the idea that I am a particular person in particular circumstances. He said that is your obstacle, and moving your body from one place to another isn't going to solve that problem. So many people came who had very active family lives, they had to support their family, and in all of these cases he would just say whatever spare time you have, put your mind on this sense of I. Watch it, be aware of it, see where it comes from, see how it manifests. And he said that if you don't waste all the spare moments of your day, if you're walking around the house, if you're going to work, if you're eating your food, you're not constantly being bugged by your children or your boss. In every person's life, there's several hours a day when it's you time. It might not be you in front of the TV, but no one is demanding your intellect or your attention or your time for anything. You are free with the contents of your mind for hours and hours of every day, no matter how busy you are. He said, in those moments, be aware of the I, be aware of how it attaches itself to thoughts, how it goes out. Watch this process, go back to this originating I that's the cause and source of all these thoughts, and just hold on to that I. Now he said, in the busiest life, the most chaotic life, if you can use your spare time to go back to the source, hold on to the I, then he says you will create a current of awareness, a current of silence, a current of peace. And in those hours of the day when you have to do your job, when you have to look after your kids, he said that prevailing background current will be there because you've established it in those spare moments when your attention wasn't required for family and job. So he never said it's something you do at fixed times. He never said you have to give up your job to do it. He said destiny will give you a particular script. Don't skimp on that script. Whatever duties you've been given, fulfill them to the best of your ability. But in every spare second you have, be aware of that I, hold on to that I, and in all the other times of your day when you're busy, you'll feel a peace, quiet background current that's a result of channeling all your spare time, all your energy into a search for the I.
Namo Ramanaya nalam peravarga.
Now, one thing that some people have a fixed idea about is that self-inquiry involves focusing on a particular place in the body. Now this is, I would say, a misconception that has several origins. Ramana Maharshi used to say that the individual I manifests first in the body in a little small spot on the right side of the chest, and from there it jumps up to the brain and says, I am this body, this is me. And he also said that if you do self-inquiry successfully, then this I will go back to this place on the right side of the chest and will ultimately disappear there. So this led many people to conclude that since Bhagavan was asking them to find the source of the I, they could focus on this place, which he said was the source, and by focusing on this place, they could make it disappear. Now, he never ever agreed with this, and the reason is what I explained earlier. If your I is looking at an object of attention, it's already extroverted itself, it's already risen to the brain, it's already up there going me, 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 I am now looking at somewhere else. The only way to make the I go back to its source is to isolate it from all the objects, all the thoughts, all the perceptions that it normally hangs on to, and when it's been completely shorn of all those associations, it gradually, slowly subsides back into this place and disappears. If you look at a place in the body, whether you're focusing on the Sahasrara or the heart center, then your I it's out, it's strong, it's in the brain, it's thinking, it's doing the thing it likes best, which is creating a little world for itself. What it's not doing is subsiding into its source. You cannot make the I disappear by looking at an object. This is Self-Inquiry 101. This is the fundamentals of why inquiry works and why other methods don't work as well. If you're looking at an object, the subject is not going to subside. Once you get that piece of Ramana's teachings fully established in your consciousness, then you can't go wrong. I will only subside when it's not looking at anything, thinking of anything. It will only disappear when it's completely shorn of every possible thought and perception. Then and only then will it go back to its source. Now Ramana, in Who Am I, he said there are two methods. There's what he called meditation and there's self-inquiry. He said meditation is when the I looks at something, focuses on something, concentrates on something. So that would be saying your mantra, worshipping an image, anything that involves extroverting attention or putting attention on an idea, a word. Whereas he said self-inquiry is focused attention not on an object, but the subject who sees and perceives the object. So he said these are two entirely different paths. Meditation looks at or thinks of things. Inquiry is simply subjectively aware of the I who does all the thinking. So this is still a somewhat contentious subject amongst people who are practicing inquiry or some form of it. One story I really like is that Annamalai Swami, one of Bhagavan's devotees, he used to do this practice, and he told Bhagavan about it, and Bhagavan said, no, that's not the way to do it. And Annamalai Swami gave a really lovely analogy. He said that just as electricity comes into your house at a particular point where your meter is normally in your fuse box, and that from that place it spreads out to all your lights and sockets inside the house, there is a place in your body where the I thought appears before it spreads out and says, this is my body, this is my mind. That place is the heart center. And he says, just as you don't experience electricity by staring at the meter box in your house, he said in the same way, you don't experience the self by staring at the place in the body where the I thought originates and rises to the brain. So I can tell stories like this all day, and people will still say, but I've done that. I have visions, I get very peaceful, I get very blissful, I've concentrated on the heart center, it's working for me, my mind is very quiet. My response to that is, you're having an experience. The correct answer to the question, who am I, is not bliss, it's not an experience, it's the extinction of the experiencer. If you're still having an experience of bliss, if you're seeing light or visions or faces inside your spiritual heart, then you've projected your mind into a particular state. You're experiencing something very peaceful, very wonderful. What you're not doing is making your individual I disappear. You're utilizing your I to have a blissful experience and then validating a completely wrong approach to self-inquiry. Self-inquiry does not result in blissful experiences. Self-inquiry results in the disappearance of the experiencer.
Namo Ramanaya Nalam Pera Vazhga Vimochanameyan Virai Malathal Vazhga
Namo Ramanaya Nalam Pera Vazhga Vimochanameyan Virai Malathal Vazhga Namo Ramanaya Nalam Pera Vazhga Vimochanameyan Virai Malathal Vazhga Adimudikundaya Anadithodarbin Viramudiya